Well, hey folks, I'm Josh. Welcome back to the shop and another episode of SAK Whittling. We call it SAK Whittling because the only tool I really use is my Swiss Army knife and maybe a few other little things that I have made to work with I've made with my Swiss Army knife to help me out. I have a pencil in my little kit here. I have a little strop to keep my blade sharp, and I have a couple little wedges that I carved, and that's my carving kit. But this particular project is to make something called a Whimmy Diddle or a Whammy Diddle or a Gee Haw. It goes by many names, but ultimately what it is just a silly little toy that you can make relatively quickly, and I don't know, it's kind of a fun little project. So all it is there is a wand that you use to rub on the main stick that has a few little notches carved into it, and there's a propeller which is then stuck on the end of that stick with a nail or a pin or something like that. And the trick to it is that you can get it to spin by rubbing the wand on the wedges, but you can also get it to spin the other way by making some slight adjustments. So they're spinning to my left, and I can get it to spin to my right. There's a trick to it. I'll show you that at the end. Ultimately, what you're going to end up with is a part that you hang on to. You're going to carve some notches into this, 10 or 12 or so, and then you're going to make a little propeller out of another piece of wood that you're going to put a hole in, and then you're going to put the nail through the hole into the end of your other stick, and then you need another smaller stick that will work as your wand or your rubbing stick or whatever you want to call it, that you're going to use to rub up and down the notches, and then that'll make the propeller spin on the end of your stick. So, being that we're doing this purely with a Swiss Army knife, I'm found a piece of wood that is pithy. The end of this stick, it's really soft, and I'm looking for that particular kind of wood because it's going to mean that I won't have to drill a hole to put my nail into the end of my wood, which would be challenging with a Swiss Army knife, at least a hole small enough for this nail to work. If you can't find a piece of pithy wood, just break down and use a drill bit. Obviously, you're looking for a drill bit that is tight on the nail, but not so tight that you're going to split the wood. You might be able to just hammer the nail into the end of the wood, but I think I would run the risk of splitting it. So I'm not going to putz around with that. I am going to put the hole in the propeller using the awl on my Swiss Army knife. So we'll see how well that works out. This particular piece of wood is from an ash tree. All the ash trees around me are dying from the emerald ash borer, so I don't feel real bad cutting off a branch because that poor tree this came from is doomed anyway. And this is a piece of, like from a sucker, you would call it sometimes. The branches that come out from the side of the trunk, they grow really fast and they're often pithy on ash trees. Other woods that are sometimes pithy, I've run into buckthorn can sometimes be pithy, and there's other woods. You just kind of have to look around for what's around you that might work out. Otherwise, you can always just drill a hole. First thing I want to do is I'm going to take the bark off of my stick that I'm going to hold because I don't expect this bark to stay on as it dries. I'm also going to take the bark off of my wand. So we're just going to kind of do that here quick, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I got all the bark taken off of these two, and this is still very green wood. I just cut this, 20-30 minutes ago. And so it's real easy to cut. And it also means, though, that some of these cuts are not real clean and sharp because that wood is so wet. So as it dries out a little bit more, those cuts could be more clean. But for now, it's good enough. And I also rounded the ends on the one that's going to be my wand, and just so that it's a little more pleasant to hold on to. The next thing I want to do is decide which end of my stick is going to be the handle and which end is going to be the end with the propeller. So I think this is going to be the orientation here, and I want to round the ends a little so that they are, a little cleaner. And be careful where you place your thumb when you're doing these paring cuts. This is a pretty easy cut to accidentally put your thumb right in the path of the blade and give yourself a nice little cut. So think about placement and where that knife is going to stop. If it stops and it slips out of the wood in this particular orientation with my thumb on this side of the stick, the knife over here, no matter what happens with this stick, there's no way for that blade to run into my thumb. If the stick was to break or my hand was to slip out or whatever the case might be, because what's actually stopping my hand, the blade, is the, my fingers running into the pad of my palm there. There's really no way for it to cut me. So think about that. So that's the side I'm going to hold on to. This is the side I'm going to stick the nail into and where the propeller is going to be. And I want to round that a little bit too, because I want to reduce the friction on that propeller. If you got a big flat area there, obviously there's more area for the propeller to rub against. So I want to round that off a little bit. I don't want to go too far, obviously, because I need some strength around that nail. I don't want the nail to split the wood as I'm pushing it in. So I just want to kind of round it down a little bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good. The next thing to do is to determine where I'm going to put the notches. You need to put 10 to 12 notches along the stick that's going to have their propeller on the end so that you can create the vibrations that are going to cause it to spin. And think about the orientation, how you want to hold it. So because this one has a curve to it, I want it to be kind of, I don't know, a little bit more ergonomic in that the curves goes this way. So I want the notches to be along the top here. And all you're doing is cutting 45-degree grooves in here. And I think spacing is a little important. I don't know that it's like a exact science here. You just need to get, about even spacing on your grooves. So I'm going to start cutting my notches right about here. And so the cuts here, you could easily, especially when you're making this cut, that where it's pulling back towards you, cut yourself. So you want to be thinking about how that is looking as you're making that cut. So there's one, and I don't think it needs to be any farther than that. I don't want to go halfway through because I don't want to get into the making the wood too weak. So I've done one. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do the next one right behind it. And again, this is a cut that you got to be thinking about what you're doing. Similar to that paring cut that I was doing, if you put your thumb behind the stick and you make the cut like this, if you can kind of see how my hand is, there's no way for the knife to actually go into my thumb because of the way I'm holding it. Even if the stick was to break and the knife went crazy, which I don't expect would happen anyway, it couldn't hit my thumb because my hand can't close that far. So think about that as you're making this cut and be careful. Don't want anybody getting hurt. So there's two, and I don't want to put it too close to the end. I think I'm going to go back this far. So I'm just going to keep going on down the stick here and kind of keep my spacing about the same. The other thing to note is this cut is much easier because this wood is green. If you have dry wood or you're doing this in a dowel or something, that's going to be a harder cut to make. And you might not have the strength to do that. If you're finding that to be the case, a couple of things to note. It's easier to make slicing cuts than it is to make cuts where you're just like jamming the knife into the wood. So if you're doing slicing cuts, place your knife against the wood, and then as you're going into the wood, obviously make a motion that causes a little bit of slicing, and you'll get a much easier cut. So you see how the blade slid as I was making that? That'll help. The other thing you can do is you can just set the stick on the bench, and you can, if you got over to the edge of your bench or your table or work surface or whatever you were, you could make this cut like this, and that would, get your fingers and hands out of the way, and you could use a little more force and be a little bit more messy about it. But I don't think that's necessary. I would much rather have nice controlled cuts because they're going to look a lot cleaner in the end, and it's probably safer for you. So there's 4. So the other thing you could do in making that cut, instead of doing this kind of weird paring cut, you could obviously turn the stick around and make the cut this way, especially when you get farther down the stick. Push cuts are generally a little easier to control than those kinds of pulling paring cuts. So whatever works best for you, find ways to be safe. And if you're the type of person that wants to wear a glove, a cut glove or a leather thumb guard or whatever makes you comfortable, you do that. There we go. All right, I got my stick good. I got my wand ready. The next thing I have to do is I have to make my propeller. Now, I'm not going to make my propeller this big, huge piece of wood. This is actually a piece of buckthorn. What I want to do is I want to split this buckthorn into a thin strip. So to do that, if you haven't seen my video on how I split wood using my Swiss Army knife, you can go check that out. But otherwise, normally I do this outside, but I already have a nice, this is not a huge stick or anything, so I'm just gonna do it on the bench top here. I have my whacking stick, and I have the piece that I'm gonna split. We're gonna use the big blade on the Swiss Army knife, and no, we are gonna need something to raise it up a little bit, because you do this with the knife at 90 degree. Watch that you don't snap your fingers in the blade there if it closes. And the first split that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split it, hopefully, right along the pith here. Okay. Now we've got that wide enough, we can use a wedge. So here we go. Put the wedge in behind there. And we got her now. Blade out of the way. There. All right. Now let's take a look. Which one of these looks better? This side. Now you could just whittle that down, but I'm too lazy. Controlled splits are always handy. This. There we go. Now I want to make another split, and I'm going to split off right along here to make a thin piece of wood that we can then use. Again, you could just whittle this down, but this is faster, I think. So here we go. Okay, back to our wedge. Again, watching out for that knife blade. There we go. That's a nice piece of wood that we can use. No pith other than that little bit of pith right there, which we're going to cut away. We're just going to trim this down into a nice flat shape that we can use. So let's clean this up a bit. Now this is probably a little longer than I want it to be in the end, which is just fine, because that gives us room to hang on to it while we're working on it. So there you go, cut out that bit that had the pith in it. We're gonna clean up this edge a little bit. So we're just working to thin this down and make it as even as possible, even though I know we got a little twist here that we're going to try to work with. We could always split out another one, but I don't know. I feel like I'm committed to this guy already here. See that little twist? That's just the following the grain of that stick, but I think that's okay. We're gonna try to just let it be. I don't think this probably needs to be this wide or this long. So maybe we should, I mean, relative to the end of that, that's a pretty good size. So it probably doesn't need to be that big. Let's see if we can kind of pare down the sides a little more. I'm going to try to do it evenly so that each side's about the same width, so that line there stays about in the middle. That's not really necessary, but just think aesthetically that's a little bit nicer. I'm going to shorten these and square them off a little bit, I hope. That's kind of my plan here. Maybe I'll round them, at least going for some symmetry here. And now you need to put a hole in the center of your propeller. And if you have a drill bit, that's obviously going to be the easiest way of doing this. That's what they're made for. But being that it's SAK Whittling, we're going to try to do it with the Swiss Army knife. Now the hole needs to be a little bit bigger than the nail, and it needs to be as close to the center as you can get it. As far as figuring that out, obviously there's ways that you could let's see, you could kind of mark the middle, and you could fold it over and be like, okay, where's the center? It's going to be right there. And that's pretty close. I happen to have a center finding ruler laying here, so I'm going to double check myself because why not? Not bad. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch off. Pretty close. So I'm going to use my pencil from my kit here. I'm going to mark that this way. And then going this way. You obviously don't need a center finding ruler. You can learn to take measurements and then divide them in half, but I love this little thing. I don't know, comes in handy. Then I don't have to do math. I can do math. I just don't want to. All right, now we got what should be our exact center, or at least as close as something like this is gonna get. So I'm just gonna take the nail and create a little bit of an impression there. A little dent to start my hole. Don't lose your nail. And I'm going to use the awl to hopefully make my hole. Now this is a place where you could stab yourself. Don't stab yourself. If you're putting too much pressure on your awl, you can go through the wood, you can split the wood, and then of course the awl is going to go into your hand, which is very undesirable. So I'm actually just going to do it on the bench top. All I'm doing is just pushing down into the bench top with the awl and just kind of spinning. And you could also just do it in the air. You just don't want to put too much pressure on it all at once because there's nothing supporting, obviously, the back end of that. And you don't want to stab yourself. So what we're looking to do is get just through to the other side, and then we'll flip it over and go to the other side to kind of clean up the cut. And we may have to use the knife a little bit to make it nice and neat, but we're not trying to like drill a giant hole. We just want a hole that's a little bit bigger than our nail so that it will spin freely. Now again, if you're doing this up in the air, don't put a lot of pressure. Just kind of let the awl do the cutting. Oh, and we're starting to come through. See that? So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to this side. I'm going to do it in the other direction. Hopefully this works out. We may have to break down and use a drill bit, but I don't think we're gonna stay strong and refuse. Spins. Oh, now what we're trying to do is determine if there is a heavy side. This side appears to be the heavy side because it's going down. Yep, every time that side ends up on the bottom. So we're going to shave a little off in an attempt to balance it because it will be harder to use if it is not balanced. So we're just going to thin it down a little bit. I'm also going to put just a tiny little pencil mark on it, so I know which side is which. Actually, look at that. There's a little mark right there. That's pretty identifiable. Okay, so let's just use that. Here we go. I think we're pretty well balanced because it's switching which side is ending down. Yeah. We're just going to hope that's good enough. Yep, just seems to stop. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. Now it's time for assembly. So because I have this nice pithy wood, I should be able to just push my nail in. Look at that. Easy peasy. And my propeller can spin. and I can see if I can get oh, goes that way. Now let's see if we can make it change directions. Oh yeah. You see that? So let's see if you can see. We rub this direction, she spins to the right. Now if we rub like this, she spins to the left. What a silly thing. There you go. So the way you change the direction that it's spinning, if you hold, this would be better if I waited until the sticks got hard, because obviously the green wood is not holding up to this very well. But once it dries out, this will be a much better thing. But I couldn't wait, I gotta check. So the way you wanna hold the wand is you kind of wrap your forefinger over the top and you push your thumb down so that it's like this, so that the stick is gonna rub right in here. And if you do it in such a way that it's hard to tell what's going on to the person observing, you can alternate which either your thumb or your finger is rubbing against the side of the stick. So if you see here, I'm rubbing on this side, that'll make it spin one way. If I rub it with my thumb on this side, it'll make it spin the other. So here, I'll show you. So now I'm rubbing with my finger and it's spinning to the right. All right. Now, if I want it to spin to the left, I move the stick over a little bit, and now I'm gonna rub it with my thumb, and it spins to the left. Nice. Works pretty well, actually. You can help a little bit too by kind of twisting the stick a little, but ultimately, it works out pretty well. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was a fun, kind of silly little thing. And if you have a little time and little materials, it's not a hard thing to make. And you can go amaze the kids out there and ask them if they can figure out how to make it go one way and then the other. Because it's not as easy as it looks unless you know the trick. So anyway, I hope you guys have a good one. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you later.